Hello everyone, Lofri Karen is back, and today we will have another brief video discussing the candidates for the possible end boss of Dragonflight. In an interview, it was explicitly stated that we won't know about who is the final boss until a certain point of the expansion, just like in Mists of Pandaria or Legion, unlike the most recent expansion, Shadowlands. So, this opens up a great deal of possibilities for the ending of Dragonflight. First, let's talk about how things could transpire throughout the expansion. If you can remember, I have emphasized the fact that Titans, Elemental Uprising, and Dragons have direct connections with the old gods. Because, actually, if this expansion is about a grounded story of Azeroth, there must be old gods. Why? I know I sound like a void-obsessed speculator. Maybe I am, but most of the time I speculate based on facts. If you look up the history of World of Warcraft, from Vanilla WoW to Shadowlands, there are some fixed storylines. What do I mean? When you take a look at the past, the only expansions that didn't have an old god arc or their influence were the Burning Crusade, Varas of Draenor, and Shadowlands. Why? Because they were not set in Azeroth. During Vanilla, we had Khotun and his city, Anchorage, as a raid. During Wrath of the Lich King, well, we have Yogg-Saron in Uldar. Cataclysm, the most powerful agent of N'Zoth, Deathwing, and in the final raid, Generals of N'Zoth. In Mists of Pandaria, we had the Shah and another old god himself, Yisharsh. In Legion, we had our first contact with Il'gynoth and raided the Emerald Nightmare itself. And in BFA, well, it turned out it wasn't a faction war expansion. At this point, you can say the story of World of Warcraft is actually based on a certain pattern and some basic formulas. So, according to this formula, Titan lore, Elemental Uprising, Dragons. You get the old gods as the correlation. But how? Every old god was dead, wasn't them? Well, we all know they are somewhat outside the cycle of life and death as we understand them. Remember the time when we get into Uldar with Brian and Khadgar to find Magni Bronzebeard? It was during the Legion pre-event, and what happened? Yogg-Saron, an old god who was presumably dead, still held his corruption on Uldar and even managed to whisper to us from beyond. So, if we are going into a full Azeroth grounded expansion with lots of Titan, Elementals, and Dragon lore, it should be only a matter of time until the old ones will reveal themselves. I am also okay with the Galakrond end boss option, which is one of the most likely ones, and we will cover it as well. Without further ado, let's get into the possible final bosses of the expansion in my opinion. First option is Galakrond, the most likely one, considering we will head into an expansion all about the legacy of the dragons. We will have followers of Galakrond, the great nemesis of our aspects. More onto that, we have just finished an expansion all about death, and Galakrond had a certain connection with the cosmic force death, as he was an all-consuming creature. and yeah, he seems like the most likely option. Considering the fact that Dragon aspects will search for a way to regain their powers, they became aspects after defeating Galakrond in the first place. I am speaking a bit metaphorically here, of course, as their powers were bestowed upon them by the Titan Keepers. Nosdormu, the second most likely option and the strongest one. Why? Let's remember whom Razond actually was. Razond was actually a twisted Nosdormu, and according to the vision shown him by the old gods, his inevitable demise. And in a recent interview, it has been stated by Blizzard, the fact that Nosdormu knows that he will transform into Murozond at some point weighs heavily on his mind, and he is having trouble clearly seeing the time waste right now. Nosdormu, as far as we know, has been corrupted by Khotun, due to the fact that Khotun was the closest one to his home, Caverns of Time. And this is pure speculation part. There is a strong, very strong possibility that the new World Tree of the Night Elves, which will be gifted by the Winter Queen, will be placed upon the sword in Silitus, and this will be how the sword will have a purpose to serve. This is not confirmed, it's not determined, but it's what I think is gonna happen. If the Night Elves are fool enough, I think they are, to put a world tree on top of an old god, we can see Khatun's rise of power in terms of influence upon the world, and that would ultimately cause Nosdormu to turn into Morgoth. Yes, and harbinger of the old gods. What do I mean by it? To be honest, I can't be sure which old god would we face at the end of the expansion, or if you have to at all. As I said, they can be easily resurrected as they can't actually die in the way we understand. So it can be Khotun, considering his direct connection with Nosdormu, or even the return of Nuzot, thanks to Rathian. But, in my opinion, the ending of this expansion will lead to an event that will turn the final key, so the old gods' millennia-long plan would come into fruition and the Black Empire may rise again. And the final and long shot option, Elun herself as a Void Goddess. Yes, she is not the counterpart of the Winter Queen or Eonar in the realm of life. She is actually one of the Void Lords or a Void Goddess because she is the first one. Yes, you did not understand anything of what I just said, so check out the videos above. So far, I have talked about the return of the Void at the end of this expansion, and Elun, the Celestial Goddess, would be an incredible ending boss and give Blizzard another chance to make a Legion ending cinematic, which they have missed for Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands. So, these were all my predictions for the final boss of Dragonflight, from the most likely to the least. As you see, based on facts, I expect the expansion will feature old gods or have their strong feeling of presence in the background. There are still a lot of unanswered questions about the story of Dragonflight, so we are done for this week. Until next time, see you.